For the first time in 6 years, Daniel Craig is back on the big screen as James Bond in No Time to Die. And you know what that means? Plenty of clever quips, steely stares, and of course, cool cars. I'm Fox News Autos editor Gary Gastelou, and with me in the Fox Garage to talk about the last of those is No Time to Die's special effects and action vehicle supervisor, Chris Corbould. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, you've been working on Bond films for over 40 years. You've been in charge of this part of it for the past few films. Compared to other action movies, how does this start for you when you're picking the cars? Is it basically a phone call to Aston Martin first? Hey, boys, what you got for us this time?
Very much so. I mean, prior to that, it's a little discussion with the director and the producers about what they'd like to see in the film. And it very quickly became apparent that everybody wanted to see the DB5 back. But not just in a cameo role, but more in a full combat mode. So having decided on that, it was a few of us trotting up to Aston Martin's and sitting down with their execs and engineers. And the question is asked, well, you know, what car do you want to use in the film? So we replied, well, we'd like to use a DB5. And the second question that they always ask is, well, how many do you think you're going to need? And when we said 10, there was a deadly silence in the room. So then the next question is, well, where do we get those 10? Do we buy 10 DB5s on the open market? Well, between 1 and 2 million a pop, probably not the best financial way of going about it. Do we go to owners and see if they'll rent us their cars? Well, if I was an owner of a DB5, would I rent it to James Bond to do an action sequence? Probably not. So the decision was made that we would, Aston Martin would supply us with 2 original DB5s, and then they would make 8 others that we would work together with them to put in all the requirements for us to do the stunts, the gadgets, and all the other weird and wonderful things we do in the sequence.
And are these similar or even the same to these continuation Goldfinger replicas they've been building, or is this a completely different project?
No, the Goldfinger replicas are total replicas. They're all aluminium bodied, whereas, you know, because of the sheer timescale, Aston Martin had to take a lot of shortcuts to have them ready in less than 6 months for us to shoot on. So, you know, they've got a brilliant team of engineers. They all got together, decided which, you know, what was going to be the best and most efficient way of producing these cars, and they did a marvelous job because they performed absolutely amazing.
Now, we've seen this in the trailer, if you haven't seen the film already. How many of them actually have the gadgets, the Gatling guns and that sort of thing that we see in action here?
We had 2 of those in the film that were fully gadgeted up, you know, and there was a lot of talk about the gadgets, you know. Should they be the original gadgets that were in Goldfinger, or should they be updated? You know, if you remember in Skyfall, it was blown up. And then in Spectre, it was back in Q's workshop where it was being rebuilt. So there was a good opportunity for the weapons to be upgraded. And Cary Fukunaga, the director, decided that he would have a mixture of both. So you've probably seen the trailer where you see the miniguns coming out the front headlights instead of the single barrel one. So that was an update. And there are various other updates that you'll see when you see the film.
In your mind, in the writer's minds, how does he keep ending up with this car updated? I mean, obviously it's stylish. He plays a lot of roles where he needs to fit into high society, but nevertheless, keep bringing back this car. What's the thought behind that?
The thought behind it is really, I think the public believes that the DB5 is Bond's personal car. You know, that's where, you know, he always comes back to the DB5 and it's in his garage and locked up. So it makes sense that he will always come back to the DB5 at some stage. You know, not in every film, but it's nice to see it. It's a beautiful car.
Now, you've got plenty of other vehicles in the film, a lot of set pieces. When you get the original script, are there model types written in there already, or is that part of the conversation with the director?
The scripts normally are just a place marker. It's up to myself and the stunt coordinator. We obviously have a roundtable conversation about what the director and producer are expecting to see. But the stunt coordinator and myself, Lee Morrison, we went out to Matera 14 times and kept coming up with different locations, different things that we could do on those locations. You know, they chose this beautiful old city in Italy, which it goes back thousands of years, to people living in caves in the side of the mountain there. And a lot of the hotels are actually built into the side of the mountain. So they chose a wonderful location, which opened up a lot of avenues for parts of the sequence that we could do.
What we're seeing on screen, how much of that is practical action? How much of that is, special effects or even some CGI thrown in there?
I'm hazarding a guess, but I think probably 95% of that car chase you see was for real. They were absolutely screaming around the streets of this beautiful old city, drifting and flipping things and guns going off, and most of it was done for real. There's not CG cars flying through the air. When you see them going around and clipping the curves and shooting up the old buildings, that's all for real.
Along with the old DB5, tell me about some of the other vehicles in the film, because I know there's some modern machines as well as some Land Rover Defender SUVs.
I think this is the most amount of Aston Martins we've had in a film. We had the V8 Vantage, which we used in Living Daylights on a sequence on an ice lake there. We've got the new DBS, which appears, which is brand new. The V8 Vantage for me was very nostalgic because I was in charge of that sequence out in Austria with the original one, and to see it come back in this film was very nostalgic for me. And there's a picture on the internet of me standing 30 years ago next to the V8 Vantage on the ice lake, and I had that same picture, not on an ice lake, but in my workshop, taken exactly the same pose 30 years apart. So it was great seeing the V8 Vantage come back. And the Defenders were. The Defenders were a very exciting innovation because there's two car chases in the film and they're both totally separate. One is urban, very fast, sports cars, etc., etc. And then we moved to this rural one, which starts off in Norway, in the highlands of Norway. And so the Defenders, which at that time weren't in full production, so the Jaguar Land Rover really had to, use all their ingenuity to. I think they built us 8. Which we worked with them to make all the requirements for the stunt people, because they did some huge jumps and they were going through rivers and you name it, they really got put through their paces.
It's certainly easy to cast a car for Bond, got to be stylish, got to be a sports car, I think. As far as bad guys in movies today, including the Bond films, does it have to be a black SUV? Is that just the way to do a baddie car?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. Weirdly enough, we look at all different colors and it always seems to come back to black. There's been, it's like having a big label on the side of it saying villain's car. It's instantly recognizable. So yeah, black seems to be the favorite color.
Now the DB5 has been in the film since Goldfinger and Thunderball. The two that were used back then, one of them has disappeared. It was stolen in 1997. There's been a hunt for it ever since. There's an investigator now who thinks he knows where it is. He says it's in the Middle East. He says he pretty much knows who owns it. And they may not have purchased it knowing it was a stolen vehicle at the time. Do you have any thoughts on where that car might be?
No, not a clue. Full of intrigue, that one. Interesting one.
All right. Chris Corbould, Special Effects and Action Vehicle Supervisor for No Time to Die. Thanks for joining us today in the Fox Garage.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
To read more about the search for that stolen Goldfinger car and for all the automotive news, head on over to foxnewsautos.com.